Let's think a little bit about pollution. We know that even though we detest pollution, the efficient amount of pollution is not zero. Rather, the efficient amount of pollution is equal to the amount of pollution for which the marginal benefit of pollution is equal to the marginal cost of pollution. Now, the reason we have pollution is because pollution is the byproduct of the manufacturing of goods and services that we do like. And therefore, the marginal benefit of pollution are those goods that we produce. The marginal cost of pollution is the harm done to people and environment from the pollutants. Okay, so the efficient amount of pollution is not zero, rather it's equal to the amount of pollution where marginal benefit equals marginal cost. It seems easy, but nevertheless, it often seems like we have too much pollution. If we have too much pollution, then the case must be that the marginal cost of pollution is greater than the marginal benefit of pollution. That is the definition of having too much. But why would society ever produce too much pollution? Why would we ever get to a point where the marginal cost of polluting something is greater than the marginal benefit from such pollution? Well, the reason is that pollution is a negative externality. An externality is any activity that creates an impact on someone different from the one who actually does the activity. We have innocent bystanders who suffers the consequences from pollution, for example. If we have an externality, then the person who does the activity, they don't care about those innocent bystanders. What they care about is not the true marginal cost of the activity, rather it is the private marginal cost. So when we think about pollution, usually it's a firm, a manufacturing firm, that produces some good. And the manufacturing firm will take into account its marginal private cost, and they will set that equal to the marginal benefit. This is the supply equals demand that we talked about before. But the marginal private cost is the cost of labor, capital, land, and so forth. It does not include the cost of society from pollution. And therefore, the marginal social cost, which includes everything, would be the sum between the marginal private cost and the marginal external cost. The marginal external cost is then the cost of pollution. The diagram we can see right now is showing this fact. You can see that the marginal private cost curve is below the marginal social cost curve. And the marginal social cost curve includes the marginal private cost plus the marginal external cost, the cost of pollution. Note that in this diagram we have drawn the marginal social cost as being steeper than the marginal private cost. What that means is that the marginal external cost, the cost of pollution, would increase as we produce more and more and more. This is a technical fact. Usually we think that as you put more and more pollutants into the environment, the cost of those pollutants are increasing. And that's what we can see right here. All right, when we look at this diagram, we see that when the firm chooses a quantity for which to maximize profits, they equate the marginal benefit, the demand curve, to their marginal private cost. But we also see that this output level is too much. This is why we have too much pollution. All right, so this diagram shows that we have too much pollution. The question then becomes, can we do something about it? Well, the answer is yes, but we might need a government. It is true there are some private solutions to this problem, but those private solutions will only work in a perfect world. And since we don't live in a perfect world, they're pretty not so important and just not very practical. But if we think about a government, then the one tool that we have learned about already is taxation. So a government can use a per unit tax to maybe solve the problem of pollution. We notice that the firm is not taking into account the marginal external cost. So what the government needs to do is try to convince the firm to take that into account. We say that we want the firm to internalize the cost of pollution. The way to internalize the cost of pollution is to give the firm a per unit tax that is equal to the cost of pollution. So if we could somehow get the firms to realize that when they produce goods and services, the true cost is not just the cost of capital, labor, and land. They should also think about the cost of pollution, the marginal external cost. Well, they won't do that unless they really have to. So this is why the government puts a tax on it. And then the firm really do have to take that into account because it's going to affect their bottom line. So the diagram we have right now behind us, or in front of me, it shows this outcome. Here we have set the tax, the per unit tax, equal to the marginal external cost at the socially optimal outcome. This is where QS would happen. And we know here that we have less output because of the tax. And we know from before that when you put a tax on the market outcome, we're probably going to have some inefficiency. But that inefficiency can be outweighed by the fact that we'll have less pollution. And that is a good thing. So we need to explore that a little bit. And the way we explore whether the tax is actually better or worse than just letting the market work its magic is to do welfare analysis. All right, so in this diagram here, I have put letters into all those little areas that come into play. And what I want to do now in this table is to do a welfare analysis, is to see, where does surplus go? When we look at this table, we see that, first of all, we have some consumer surplus. We have consumer surplus in the market outcome, and that will be equal to areas A, B, G, I. This is the area below the demand curve and above the price they pay in the market outcome. And producer surplus is equal to C, D, E, F, and H. This is the area above the supply curve, the marginal private cost curve, and below the market price. Now, if there is no externality, we would be done there. But because we have externalities, a cost of pollution, we also have to take into account the total cost of pollution. Now, the way we calculate the total cost of pollution is to find the area in between the marginal social cost curve and the marginal private cost curve. Remember, the distance between those curves is the marginal external cost. And if you add up the marginal external cost for all output levels, we'll have the total external cost. And in this example, the total external cost is EFG HIJ. Of course, this is something that's bad. We don't like pollution. So therefore, when we do total surplus, we have to add up consumer surplus, producer surplus, and then subtract the external cost. And that's what we have done there at in the very end, the last row in that first column. And therefore, total surplus is equal to A, B, C, D minus J. Now, if we do the same thing under a government tax, a pollution tax, then we see that the consumer surplus will now be equal to A. The consumer is going to pay more because of the tax, and therefore we lose some consumer surplus. The producer surplus is going to be equal to areas D and E, and because of the tax, producers receive a lower price as well. But that loss in consumer surplus and producer surplus mostly goes to the government. So the government now collects areas B, C, F, and G in tax revenue. All right, once again, we would have had an inefficiency if we did not have an external cost. But because of external cost, we have now, because quantity has decreased, we're going to have less cost of pollution. And the total external cost here is now, again, the area below the marginal social cost curve and above the marginal private cost curve up to the quantity being produced. But now we produce a smaller quantity, and therefore the external cost will be smaller. So the external cost here is equal to E, F, and G. Again, to find the total surplus, we add up consumer surplus, producer surplus, and now government revenue, and then we subtract out the external cost for pollution. And what we are left with then is A, B, C, D. We notice that the government tax outcome is actually bigger in terms of total surplus than the market outcome. We used to subtract the area J, but now we don't do that anymore. Hence, the area J was the deadweight loss associated with the negative externality, the pollution effect. All right, so now we have shown that the government can indeed sometimes improve on the market outcome. By putting a sales tax, or a pollution tax in this case, on the firm changes its behavior. By internalizing the marginal external cost, they are now producing less than they used to. In fact, if the government does it just right, the firm will produce just the right amount that is socially optimal. And that is the efficient outcome. And at that point, we will have that the marginal benefit is equal to the marginal social cost. The marginal benefit is equal to the true cost of producing this good, including the cost of capital, labor, and land, as well as the cost of pollution. Thank you.